Now I move to the last part. I just try to raise some questions for our further discussion, because I end with some questions. I hope that everybody can contribute to the discussion of these. The first four is the transformations in the structure of sovereignty because of globalization. The globalization means that the great transformation of the sovereign structure. Basically, in the 20th century, we live within a system of sovereignties. But now, in the globalization, not only the finance, internet, but also the global organization, WTO, EU, Shanghai 6 countries, or the China promote the new project, the One Belt, One Road, and so on and so forth, which means that globalization is a globalization. In these contexts, on the one hand, it was the crisis of the traditional form of autonomy and the sovereignty. It's not possible to keep the older way of the independence autonomy in that case, because we are interrelated, right? It's not, we are already integrated into the global system in that sense. But on the other hand, we found that the crisis happened in other countries could be immediately become our own crisis. If 3 decades ago, that was still not possible for China. But now, obviously, we are in a financial crisis. Chinese economy slowed down, partly because of the reasons in China, partly because of the global context. So no way to get rid of the whole process. So several years ago, I remember that now Neil Ferguson, now our guest professor here, too, he put forward a new term, Chi America. Then he said that maybe it's too exaggerated, maybe. But on the other hand, if not the Chi America, but we talk about the interrelated, interdependent economy already emerged here, both interdependent. That was totally different from before. So in this case, when I talk about the old tradition, I'm not arguing that we need to go back to the older forms. We are in the new context. New context needed a new idea of autonomy, but not against the opening. So that's a big challenge. On the one hand, you need a certain kind of autonomy, but that autonomy not necessarily mean that you are closed door, you are not linked to others. We are interrelated. So how, in that sense, autonomy also means the way of cooperation, how to do that. So this is one of the big issues. So how I suggest that this, I'm not the economist, as you know. I hope that you can give me more advices on these issues. So at the same time, I will give you some other, because we know talk about the Chinese, the crisis or the challenges China facing. The first of all is the transformation of sovereignty. It's not only because of China itself, but also the global transformation. Traditional idea of sovereignty is undergoing the great transformation. So what kind of the new form was not so clear? We need to think about that. So this is the one issue. Second, the most important political force in Chinese, both in Chinese Revolution and the Chinese Socialist period, or the Chinese Reform, has been the Communist Party. Chinese Communist Party was, to some extent, is quite a unique political organization. You know, the members of the Communist Party is almost equal to the whole population of Germany. In human history, if you compare only with the exception of the dynasty, empire, nation state, it's very difficult to find the same scale, political organization in such scale. So he penetrated every corners and penetrated into every social strata. So this is the very important. But on the other hand, more and more difficult to describe its political nature because of the ambiguity of political values. We know that the three represents harmonious society, scientific view of development, and so on and so forth. Compared to the 20th century, the political value was much more ambiguous to some extent. And these were, especially the slogan of three represents, showed that the political party gradually integrated into the framework of the whole state. To some extent, on the one hand, people will argue that the party became more and more powerful. From my point of view, yes, but on the other hand, more and more dominated by the logic of the state apparatus rather than as a political organization in the sense of the 19th, 20th century. It's played a certain kind of the role of state apparatus rather than the political organizations. So we know that certain kind of the distance between the state and the political organization was, traditionally speaking, was the very important for keep the political forces, right? The political movements within the state structure, avoid the bureaucratization and so on and so forth. But now, when the party itself integrated into the whole framework of the state, how that party maintained its political nature became a big challenge, I think. Maybe the toughest the challenge. It's because it's very different. So when we find, for example, now we are in the process of the quite severe anti-corruption campaign. And the discipline committee of the party is the most important mechanism together with the legal framework. But actually we know that kind of the system almost played the role of the state too. Because most of the high-rank officials, on the one hand, they are party members, but on the other hand, they are ministers or even higher positions in the whole state structures. So these were the quite very important transformation. If you compare on the one hand, the whole the political structure remained unchanged, but you look at its moments or the function of that, a lot of change happened. So I use the term of the statification of political party as a political phenomena nowadays. So which means that it's very difficult how to describe the political nature of the Communist Party became a big challenge, a big issue. I think we need to rethink about that. On the one hand, it's very capable, but on the other hand, it's also faced the challenge of bureaucratization, corruption, and so on and so forth. So this is another issue. Third one, I think it's also compared to the early stages. We know that the workers were mainly agri-migrants. And during the wartime, revolutionary period, as well as in the socialist era, the peasants played quite an important role. That certain kind of political subjectivity emerged from historic the grounds that for the peasants. But what kind of the role of those peasants? Nowadays, a huge transformation will happen. I'm not talking about the economy. I talk about the political transformation too, because that was the historical foundation for the 20th and the 21st China. That was the beginning. Otherwise, it's very difficult to understand the great transformation of China. So these were the big issues. So I use the term that China's political system had undergone significant transformations, among which is the change in the role of the ruling party, the trend towards the statification of the ruling party. In Chinese, is a 政党国家化. So these, in the 1990s and beyond, the will of the state was primarily expressed in the objectives of the ruling party. And those slogans I mentioned earlier, that if you compare these slogans to the slogans raised by party in the 20th century, is a great difference. That because it shows the necessity, responded to the new conditions. But still, for me, is that how to understand the transformation of political organization now is a big issue. Of course, it's not only the issue for China. What kind of the nature of political parties in other social systems and other kind of the political regimes are big issues too, right? The right-wing, left-wing social democrats or the liberals, right? These were terms became more and more ambiguous. China faced the same challenges. So under the conditions of the market society, the state apparatuses have a direct hand in economic activity such that different branches of the state are mutually entangled with the special interests. The notion of prevalent at the beginning of the reform period of the neutral state is now being transformed. So how can we have the political force to change that trend? To change that trend, make the people believe that it's a kind of either reconstruction of the representativeness of the political system, or in a sense, I don't believe that there was so-called neutrality of the state. But you can argue that how can make that state and its policy can be beneficial to the majority or the peoples, that how legitimize the whole new stage of the Chinese reform. I think this is I think it's a really a big challenge. So I give you some questions for your comments. Under the new terms, by what kind of political force does the state maintain its broader representativeness? How could that? Without these representativeness, it's very difficult to legitimize your any kind of reform policy. You will any kind of the reform policy, maybe good kind. Good, you have the good cautions. However, people were skeptical. On what strengths can the state rely in actual fact to achieve self-renewal? How that the state can? The reform, as I said, that the early reform started from within, not by the order from others. So what kind of the force from within that can do that? How to allow the voices of the common people to be heard in the public domain and in the process of policy making. Certain kind of the process of democratization, but not necessarily formally in the way of Eastern European or other countries. How to adopt the genuine freedom of speech negotiating mechanisms and the continuous mutual checks and the balances between the officials and the people in the elaboration of the basic line and the policies of the state and the party. How to attract both domestic and international forces to form a democracy in the broadest sense. I use this term, broadest sense, partly because compared to the context in 1989, the situation is very different. In 1989, most people believed that we can adopt the other model. Democracy can adopt it to us. Maybe we can change our system. But to some extent, democracy itself in different countries also in crisis, here and there. So it's not simply you can adopt some other existing systems. We can start from these our own historical conditions to find the internal forces to renew our systems? So this is the question for all of you. Any comments and your comments about these questions, or you can raise your questions.